additional peace of mind that it will more than likely work for your Ryzen CPU powered PC. They'll probably also come with more overclocking profiles for one-click overclocks. They just aren't required, but it does give us a nice idea as to the impact Ryzen is having in the enthusiast community. So on to picking the RAM. Especially if you're picking anything above 2667, the absolute first thing to do when deciding it is to figure out what motherboard you have or what motherboard you plan on buying. Of course, one factor in determining your motherboard should be the RAM they support to begin with, but that's up to you and whether you want to overclock, etc. Once you've got the motherboard in question, go to the manufacturer's site. In this example, I'm looking at the Asus ROG Crosshair 6 Hero. When you go to the site, this should be relatively the same for all manufacturers. You then click on support and find your motherboard. Next, you want to go into memory device support. Sometimes it will be listed as QVL or qualified vendors list. This is the RAM that's guaranteed to work on your motherboard and has been tested by the manufacturer. Go to the one for Ryzen here. You can see they update it quite a bit. That's because manufacturers are still testing RAM and figuring out what works the best. So you know what your motherboard supports, but what should you get? Frequency, timings, capacity, dual, single channel, etc. Well, Ryzen is very much a different beast than Intel, and in many ways it's a good thing, but in some, it's adding confusion. Sure, there are the basics like only supporting DDR4, but there's a ton more to it. Let's go over what to look for. The first is capacity. Ryzen only seems to support up to 64 gigabytes, but really no gamer will need anywhere near that. One suggestion is certain though, I wouldn't suggest lower than 16 gigabytes for anyone. Those who do a lot of video editing or other professional work might be better to go up to 32, but it depends on what you do. Next up is frequency. This is really where Ryzen can show us its muscle, and AMD has actually given us some great information based on their testing. First, it's good to discuss what Ryzen can and can't do when it comes to frequency. This graph essentially gives you everything you need to know. Ryzen can only work in dual channel, and the higher the rank, with up to 2, lessens the amount of frequency you can get to because it adds more strain on the memory controller. If you're curious to know more about ranking, Hardware Canucks has a great article on it. I'll leave a link in the description below. Basically, in most cases, the way to know what rank you have is to look at its single or double-sided memory. Single-sided memory is almost always single channel, and single channel is what you're going to want unless you need 16 gigabyte DIMMs. That is actually one way Ryzen branded memory can help when it comes to alleviating this confusion. Note that Ryzen still supports dual rank, you just won't get as high of a frequency, but if you need to go for 32 gigabytes and definitely 64, you may not have a choice. The last thing to note on this graph is that using 2 DIMMs instead of 4 gets you higher frequencies, so keep that in mind. But definitely look to your motherboard's QVL for reference. Now when it comes to picking your frequency on Ryzen, speed or higher frequency is important. Like really important. Faster RAM makes a bigger difference than it has in the past, and this includes gaming. If you want to know why that is, check out my video from 2 days ago on Ryzen's problems. LegitReviews.com actually did a fantastic article that looks at the scaling of the RAM as you move up in frequency. I'll have a link in the description on that as well. But the results were incredible. Going from 2133 to 3200, they found a whopping 50% improvement in memory bandwidth, and they only seemed to test one game, but AMD showed a similar result with F1. Either way, and Deus Ex Mankind Divided running at 1080p, they saw a 16% increase when going from 2133 to 3200. We're talking 95 frames to 110 frames. Obviously, your experience will vary because they were using certain hardware. One thing to note is that there was almost no difference at 1440p, which goes back to the idea that higher frame rates depends more on the GPU, so that ultimately ends up being the bottleneck. If you're debating on what frequency RAM to get, you can see the graph shows there are less gains to be had from some frequency jumps than others, but of course each game can vary that quite a bit. You just have to weigh the options for what you want and what you can afford. While still on the topic of frequency, we also need to discuss overclocking. Ryzen officially only supports 2667 and only with single rank and 2 DIMMs. If you get RAM rated at 3200 megatransfers per second, to actually use that speed, you have to have a motherboard that supports the overclocking to get it done. So definitely check your motherboard's ability. This is one thing you're gonna see as you go up into more expensive motherboards. I did a motherboard video like this a little while back, but I didn't know at the time the significance of memory frequency in Ryzen, so I may do a new one before long. Either way, definitely check what your particular motherboard can do. Also know that if you do overclock, you may void your warranty. AMD makes it clear that you will, quote, void any applicable AMD product warranty, end quote. So please keep this in mind. As far as what frequency overclock it officially supports, AMD currently goes up to 3200 with overclocking. But that seems to be changing soon, as AMD officially stated they're working on it and intend to issue updates to motherboard partners in May. Which motherboard manufacturers will choose to support higher frequencies is up to them, but AMD has shown Ryzen working on Twitter with 3400. The last thing to discuss with frequency is to not purchase any DDR4 at 3000 or 3400. AMD specifically says that they do not offer memory dividers for them. It's best to go ahead and get 3200 or 3500 respectively. The last thing to really think about beyond frequency is your timings. Timings essentially add latency to your RAM. It's kind of a balancing act between your frequency and timings. Higher frequency lowers latency, but higher timings raise latency. It definitely seems getting the higher frequency is more important than lower timings, though there isn't a ton of benchmarks to look at that. I basically suggest higher frequency with the lowest timings you can afford and your motherboard supports. So yeah, that concludes the video today. I know I didn't go over everything, and some things are subject to change as we learn more about AMD's new chips, but this should be a good start to nudging you in the right direction. I'll have an affiliate link to the different Ryzen 7 CPUs in the description below. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe. I have a ton of great content coming, and as always, have a great day.
Soon they shall bask in my glory. You will rise again.
Hey, welcome guys. In this video we're doing a review of the Asus VG248QE gaming monitor. This is a 24-inch LED backlit display with a widescreen ratio of 16:9. Now with the stand, the entire unit is weighing 12.12 pounds. In terms of rotation and customization as to height adjustment, you have a ridiculous amount of options. Pivoting left and right, you'll have a wide range of degree. As you can see, pushing it up or down will adjust the height. There's no notches of any kind. It kind of has its own built-in springs, so it's really easily done. And yes, it does pivot to a portrait type screen. So for those of you that want to do some coding, just for example, I don't know why you're doing a gaming monitor, but just want to mention it, you do have that option also available. And yes, I don't want to forget about the most simplistic of monitor adjustments, and that is pivoting up or down, forward or downwards, whatever you want to call it, diagonally. So you do have all these various options available. And on the back, we have various input and output ports. Looking on the far right in this angle, you notice there's one for a headphone jack and a speaker input. That's because there are speakers on the device that you can see. Notice, so you can pull that back out to headphones if you want. There's an HDMI port, a DVI port, and a display port. Getting a bit of a tongue twister there. But if you want the 144 Hz refresh rate capability, do not use HDMI. In fact, never use HDMI on this monitor if possible, and I'll explain why later on. Of course, there's an AC adapter on the far left. You'll see a little hole is for a Kensington lock. There's also an included neat little feature at the back of the stand. There's this red clip which is designed for cable management, which is nice and it works pretty well at hiding cables for the most part. Around the entire rim of the base, you'll notice that there's some really tiny writing, which basically has a whole bunch of features that the monitor is capable of, say 3D capability, the refresh rate. You would think that would look kind of tacky with features written on the base etched in permanently. It actually looks pretty nice and subtle the way they did it here. For its overall physical appeal, it is a fairly attractive design, especially with that base, which you have that 3D logo and all that kind of neat features written in that tiny little writing as I demonstrated on the base. The bezels are a little large though. That's kind of a given, especially considering this is a gaming monitor. It has to push a bit harder compared to regular monitors, so not a big deal. Overall, it's pretty attractive. You've got a red and black theme going on, and I have to say it's pretty good for the most part. The one gripe I have though, major one with this monitor, is that it's glossy all over. So this is a huge dust magnet, so expect it to get fairly dusty on the monitor if you're in a dusty environment. Now you will notice that this monitor is rather thick for an LED size tend to consume just over half that amount. Now with regards to the level of detail, this is a 1080p monitor with support of 16.7 million colors. Now in terms of sharpness, it's very sharp, very clear. Now the colors are okay. Now the thing to keep in mind here, this is a TN panel monitor, so for those of you that say heavy photo editors and need extremely accurate colors, you might want to look elsewhere. Now I'm not saying that the colors are horrible on this monitor, it's just that it's designed more for gaming at a high refresh rate, not so much for color and video editing, so you might want to look a little bit elsewhere. Out of the box, the colors are rather dull, so you might need to do some adjustments. Major deal, in most environments, this monitor does a pretty nice job of preventing screen glare and light reflection. Now going back to some of the most important details, this is a gaming monitor, so it has a 1 millisecond response time and 144 Hz refresh rate. So that 1 millisecond response time for the most extreme first-person shooters players, they'll be needing that extra response time, which will help in just a fraction of a second. And of course that 144 Hz refresh rate means that the picture is refreshing 144 times per second. So whether you're playing first-person shooter or a third-person viewing game, such as what I'm playing now, the Shadow of Mordor, when panning left and right, or just even the movement of my character, it is extremely smooth all the time. Going from a 60 Hz refresh rate monitor, which is pretty much the industry standard for those of you that are not too tech savvy, and then going over to this one, it is extremely refreshing. In fact, when even on my desktop, and just moving my mouse around with the 144 Hz refresh rate kicked in on this monitor, I can see just how buttery smooth the mouse movement is. I know that sounds absurd, and it might sound like I'm over-exaggerating. I'm not. I'm being dead serious. I will never go back to a non-gaming monitor ever. However, to get the full potential of this monitor, I really recommend that you stick with a more powerful graphic card, and of course it must be NVIDIA to get the capabilities of that refresh rate and playing your games at top performance, and yes, even 3D video game playback. So in regards to that 3D capability, yes, this is a 3D gaming monitor, which no one really talks about. However, in order to achieve this, you need a NVIDIA graphic card that can support 3D output, and on top of that you need to purchase the NVIDIA 3D glasses. And unfortunately, it is a sold separately device. So it's a bit of an expense you'll have to pay if you really want the ability to play games in 3D, and yes, even watch 3D movies on your computer. However, this is a sold separately device, so I'll be doing a review on the 3D glasses in a separate video. You can find a link to that review in the video description. As mentioned earlier, there are two speakers on this monitor, each at 2 watts, so it's not that powerful but I expect great results. What I'm going to do now is put the computer volume and YouTube volume at max, while the speakers within the monitor are at 50% volume, so let's get a listen. The only light found on the mouse is the G logo on the top, which is a neon blue color. There's no custom RGB lighting. For those of you that have a need to increase the weight distribution of the mouse, you certainly do have that option available. And this time I'm going to be switching over to putting the monitor at 100% volume. Yes, you can even customize the left and right click buttons. And as for the scroll wheel, when shifting left or right or clicking down on the scroll wheel itself, you won't accidentally scroll. So as you can see, there are speakers indeed in there, but they're not that great. But hey, if you really need to hook up your PS4 or your Xbox or whatever it may be to a monitor and you're desperate, well, this could work for you. The physical control buttons have a